The Dreamer from Basel. The story begins in the gentle hush of Switzerland, in the small town of Basel, where the Rhine River curves like a ribbon of quiet thought. It was here, in 1875, that Carl Gustav Jung first opened his eyes to a world that already seemed filled with unseen meaning. His childhood was a tapestry woven from silence, solitude, and the strange shimmer of the unknown. The boy was shy, withdrawn, and prone to daydreaming, not out of boredom, but as though his mind already wandered beyond the edges of visible life. His father was a pastor, a man of faith worn thin by doubt. His mother, often ill and withdrawn, carried an aura of mystery that the young Jung both feared and adored. At night, she would speak of spirits and omens, her words half whispered, half dreamed. Jung listened closely. He lived much of his early life caught between these worlds. At school, he played the role of a quiet observer, fascinated by ideas, but alienated from the noisy games of other children. Alone, he built little villages of stones by the riverbank, speaking to them as if they were alive. And in a way, to him, they were. These stones became symbols, silent companions in his early conversations with the unconscious. It was the beginning of a lifelong relationship with imagination, not as escape, but as truth. When Jung was 12, something happened that would stay with him forever. One day at school, he fainted, suddenly, inexplicably. For months afterward, he was haunted by the fear of collapse, paralyzed by anxiety. He stopped studying, withdrew further. It was as if his unconscious had rebelled against the rigid expectations of the outer world. And so the fainting stopped only when he decided, quietly, defiantly, that he would no longer live according to others' rules. That moment of awakening planted the seed for everything that would follow. He saw that the human mind was not a machine to be controlled, but a living landscape that could speak through dreams, through symptoms, through symbols. His fainting spells had been a kind of conversation, his first encounter with what he would later call the shadow, the hidden self that acts when we ignore our truth. Even as a boy, Jung was drawn to mystery. He read endlessly, Goethe, Kant, Schopenhauer, searching for words that matched the strange feelings that moved through him. Yet books alone could not answer what he felt in his bones, that human beings are not just rational creatures. Beings are not just rational creatures, but spiritual ones, shaped by invisible forces. He began keeping notebooks of dreams and symbols, trying to map the landscape of his inner world. In one dream, he saw an underground chamber filled with ancient bones and golden artifacts. It terrified him, yet it also fascinated him. Only much later would he realize that this dream foreshadowed his life's work, the descent into the depths of the psyche to uncover humanity's buried history. The young Jung did not yet have the language for what he sensed. He only knew that something immense lived inside him, something older than himself, speaking in images rather than words. It was a presence, an intelligence that seemed to belong to all people, not just him. And though he couldn't yet name, he discovered both the comfort and the burden of deep introspection. He was beginning to understand that his path would not be one of ordinary happiness, but of searching for meaning in what others dismissed as madness or mystery. Sometimes he would sit alone for hours, watching the play of light on water, thinking about the strange dualities that defined life. Faith and doubt, reason and mystery, day and night. These opposites would later become the foundation of his psychology. The belief that balance, not perfection, leads to wholeness. As Jung grew older, the outer world began to demand its place. He enrolled in medical school at the University of Basel, where science and his classmates saw only the surface of things. Jung sought the soul beneath. In the sterile halls of academia, he began to feel a quiet rebellion stir within him. Psychology, as it was taught then, spoke of behavior and sensation, but never of spirit. And so once again, Jung found himself divided between two worlds, one of logic and one of dream. That tension between science and soul would define his life. It would drive him into his deepest explorations, and at times nearly break him. Yet even now, in his early years, he seemed to know that this paradox was not meant to be solved, but lived. In the glow of his student lamp, Jung would stay awake into the small hours, sketching, writing, thinking. The river outside whispered through the darkness, and in those but to honor it. And so, in the quiet heart of Basel, a dreamer began his lifelong descent, not away from the world, but into its hidden soul. And as the night deepened, his journey moved quietly forward, toward a meeting that would forever alter the landscape of modern psychology. Freud and the Fracture of the Mind. Vienna, 1907. A city humming with the low murmur of cafes, smoke, and restless minds. In that world of velvet shadows and flickering lamps, a young Carl Jung arrived to meet the man who had haunted his thoughts for months, Sigmund Freud. Jung had read Freud's interpretation of dreams and felt a rare electric recognition. Here was someone who seemed to see beneath the surface, who dared to speak aloud what others only whispered. Yet even before their first meeting, Jung felt both admiration and unease. At circling the same mystery, the human psyche, Freud spoke of repression, of forbidden desires that shaped every action. He believed that the mind was a battleground of instincts, ruled by sexuality and fear. Jung listened, fascinated, yet deep inside, something resisted. He felt that Freud's vision, though powerful, was incomplete. To Jung, the human soul was not just a prisoner of desire. It was a seeker, yearning for wholeness. Still, their bond was immediate and intense. Freud, the seasoned father figure. Jung, the gifted son he had longed for. Freud saw in Jung a successor who might carry his ideas into the future, unburdened by the anti-Semitic prejudice that often shadowed Freud's own work. Jung, in turn, found in Freud the mentor he had always. But even in the early days, small cracks began to form. Freud was a man of fierce convictions, protective of his theories, and suspicious of mysticism. Jung, however, was drawn toward the symbolic, the spiritual, the mythic. He could not ignore the strange visions and dreams that colored his inner world. He saw meaning in ancient myths, in religion, in the timeless stories that reappeared in every human heart. Freud dismissed these as wishful illusions. To him, a sacred was merely the disguised expression of forbidden desire. The tension between them grew quietly, like a storm beneath calm skies. Their letters, once warm, became strained. Freud began to call Jung's ideas dangerous deviations. Jung, feeling trapped, tried to reconcile his loyalty with his intuition, but the distance only deepened. The break came not with anger, but with sorrow. Freud, ever the patriarch, declared that Jung had fallen into darkness. Jung, heartbroken but resolute, stepped away, not only from Freud, but from the world that had defined him. It was a fracture that would echo through the rest of his life. The loss of Freud was not just professional, it was spiritual. For years, Jung had felt anchored by Freud's authority. Now, that anchor was gone, and he was adrift in a sea of symbols and shadows, unsure which were real and which were dreams. Yet somewhere beneath the pain, a quiet truth stirred, that in losing his teacher, he had found his path. For Jung, the separation was both death and rebirth. He would later write that a man who has not passed through the inferno of his passions has never overcome them. The break with Freud was his inferno, a fire that burned away certainty, leaving only the raw question of meaning. He began to withdraw from the academic world, from colleagues who whispered that he had gone mad. He spent more time alone near the lake at Krasnacht, surrounded by the patient silence of nature. He would walk for hours, thinking, feeling the slow stirring of a deeper voice within. It was during this solitude that he began to experience vivid dreams and waking visions, scenes that shook him to the core. Floods swallowing cities, blood rising from the earth. He feared he was losing his mind. Yet part of him sensed that something was trying to speak through these images, something ancient, collective, and deeply human. The split with Freud had opened a door, not into madness, but into mystery. He had sacrificed certainty for truth, comfort for authenticity. And now, standing on the edge of the unknown, Jung faced the same choice every seeker must face: to turn back toward the safety of reason, or to descend into the darkness of the soul and see what waited there. And so he chose the descent, not as rebellion, but as surrender to the voices, the symbols, the dreams that had always followed him. And as the night deepened, Jung stepped beyond the threshold into the vast, trembling landscape of his own unconscious, the dark night of the soul. The world outside had grown quiet, but inside Carl Jung's mind, storms began to rise. It was 1913, the year Europe stood whispering through dreams that grew darker with every night. He began to see visions, not fleeting images, but entire scenes as vivid as waking life. Rivers of blood spreading across the continent. Frozen lands cracking open beneath red skies. He thought, at first, that madness had found him. Yet, when the Great War broke out a year later, Jung realized these were not hallucinations. They were premonitions. The collective unconscious, he would later say, had spoken through him. It was as though the pain of an entire world had reached through the veil of his own mind, demanding to be seen. This was his dark night of the soul, a descent that lasted nearly 6 years. During that time, Jung withdrew from nearly every and dialogues from his inner world. It was as if he had stepped into another realm, one where myth, dream, and reality intertwined. At times he feared he had crossed the threshold of sanity, yet he refused to run. "I must find the meaning of these images," he wrote. "I must let them unfold." And so he surrendered, not as a scientist observing from the distance, but as a pilgrim walking through the dark. He called this process his confrontation with the unconscious. To Jung, it was not an illness, but an initiation, a painful unfolding of the psyche. He spoke with inner figures, archetypes he would later name. Philemon, the wise old man with wings of a kingfisher. Salome, the dark feminine who embodied both love and danger. And countless others who appeared like actors on the stage of his imagination. Night after night, he recorded his visions in a massive crimson leather-bound book. He painted with meticulous care mandalas, serpents, suns, and labyrinths, each image a symbol of transformation. This book would come to be known as the Red Book, though it would remain hidden for decades after his death. Within its pages lay the map of his inner descent, a diary of madness that turned into meaning. There were moments when he nearly broke, when the images became too powerful. He would go outside and work with his hands, carving small stones, building miniature towers on the lakeshore. It grounded him, kept him tethered to the world of form. "I had to find something solid," he would later say, "or I would have been torn apart by the forces that rose from the depths." And yet, it was through this agony that his greatest insights began to bloom. He realized that within every human being lives a shadow, the dark. The only way to become whole, he saw, was to face this shadow, to walk willingly into our own night. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, Jung wrote, but by making the darkness conscious. This was the truth he learned in solitude, that the soul heals not by avoiding pain, but by embracing it. The descent into the unconscious was not a fall, but a journey of transformation. In the mythic language he loved, yet somehow larger, like a man who had seen both heaven and hell and learned they were mirrors of the same soul. His hair had turned gray, his eyes deeper. Friends said he spoke more slowly now, as if weighing every word against eternity. Out of that darkness, Jung's system of thought was born. The ideas of archetypes, individuation, the collective unconscious. But these were not academic theories to him. They were lived truths carved from experience. He had faced the abyss, and instead of collapsing, he had found meaning within it. As he returned to the world, teaching again, writing again, he carried with him the calm of a man who had made peace with his shadow. And though he seldom spoke publicly about the Red Book, its spirit flowed through all his later work. In time, Jung would say that each of us must undergo our own descent, a period when the light fades, and we must learn to see with inner eyes. No tree, he wrote, can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell. And so, his dark night became a kind of quiet dawn, the birth of a new understanding of the human soul. And as the night deepened, Jung rose slowly from the depths, carrying the light he had found in darkness. The language of symbols. When Jung emerged from the storm of his inner descent, he did not return with commandments or theories. He returned with symbols, shapes, colors, and images that shimmered like fragments of an ancient language forgotten by time. To him, these symbols were not mere decorations of the mind. They were messages, bridges between the seen and the unseen, the soul's alphabet. He began to notice them everywhere. In dreams, in art, in the myths of distant cultures, and even in the casual stories people told about their lives. A serpent winding through a... Jung understood then that the unconscious did not think in words, but in symbols. It was a world that spoke through metaphor, image, and emotion. He compared it to an ancient script, one that each of us carries, but few of us ever learn to read. The Psyche, Jung wrote, is a self-portrait in symbolic form. In his therapy sessions, he began asking patients not just what they thought, but what they dreamed. He encouraged them to draw, to paint, to sculpt, to let the unconscious speak without censorship. And often, what emerged was startlingly familiar, patterns he had seen in his own Red Book visions, symbols that echoed across ages and continents. There was something profoundly... These were the deep, recurring patterns of thought and emotion that shaped all myths, religions, and dreams. They were the timeless characters that live within us all. The hero, the mother, the shadow, the child, the sage. To Jung, this realization was sacred. It meant that our inner lives were not chaos, they were cosmos. That every dream, no matter how strange or frightening, carried a purpose, a message from the deeper layers of being. Trying to help the conscious mind find balance, he began to see the entire world as a living network of symbols. The cross, the circle, the tree, the serpent, the sun, each carried thousands of years of human memory. He would later spend hours sketching mandalas, intricate circular patterns that represented the self in its process of becoming whole. Whenever he felt confusion or inner conflict, he drew them. Each mandala, he said softly, symbols became his compass, his way of listening to the divine conversation between mind and mystery. He noticed how dreams often compensated for what our waking minds ignored. A man obsessed with success might dream of falling endlessly, a reminder that his soul longed to rest. A woman too generous with others might dream of locked doors, an image urging her to protect her boundaries. The unconscious, he realized, was not our enemy. It was our oldest friend, always trying to restore balance through the quiet poetry of symbols. To live without symbols, Jung believed, was to live half blind, to see only the outer form of things and miss their inner resonance. Modern man, he said, had become spiritually starved in stories, in the images that move us without our knowing why. He spoke of the symbol as a living thing, something that grows and changes as we do. Unlike signs, which point to fixed meanings, symbols invite us to explore. A symbol cannot be explained fully. It can only be experienced. It is a doorway, not a definition. And through that doorway, Jung walked again and again, into the depths of myth, alchemy, astrology, and religion, not as superstition, but as psychology in disguise. The old alchemists, he said, were not turning lead into gold in the literal sense. They were performing the great work of the soul, transforming the raw material of human experience into the gold of self-knowledge. Every culture, every age had used symbols to map the invisible world. The Egyptians had their scarabs, the Greek one great mirror reflecting many forms. And as he studied these symbols, he began to sense a pattern emerging, one that pointed to a single truth, that all the paths of meaning lead inward. Whether through myth or religion, art or dream, all were languages of the same soul seeking to understand itself. At night, Jung often sat by the lakeside, watching the moon ripple across the water. To most, it was just light and reflection. But to him, it was the eternal dialogue between consciousness and the unconscious, the sun's hidden face, glowing softly through the night. Symbols, he realized, were not inventions of man. They were the mind's natural way of remembering its own depth. To ignore them was to lose touch with who we are. To honor them was to begin to heal. And so, as the years unfolded, Jung became both scientist and poet. Was another attempt to bridge the gap between what we know and what we feel. Because to Jung, psychology was never about control. It was about connection. About learning to listen again to the whispers of the unconscious, to the ancient grammar of symbols that forever speak our truth. And as the night deepened, his search for meaning drifted further inward, toward the shadow that waited quietly beneath the light. The shadow within, every light casts a shadow. Every truth has its twin, the part we try to forget, the side we hide even from ourselves. For Carl Jung, this was not a poetic metaphor. It was one of the deepest realities of human nature. He called it the shadow, the dark, unacknowledged part of our psyche that contains all we reject, deny, and fear to face. He realized that these figures were not foreign invaders. They were him. Parts of his own nature that his conscious mind had refused to accept. For every virtue he had cultivated, there was an equal and opposite impulse buried below, waiting to be recognized. And he understood with chilling clarity that every person carries such a hidden world inside. The shadow, Jung said, is the doorway to wholeness, but only if we dare to enter. It is not evil in itself. It becomes dangerous only when ignored. The more we repress our anger, envy, fear, and desire, the more powerfully they rise in disguise. They appear as projections, as moral judgment, as hatred toward others who reflect our own unclaimed parts. Everything that irritates us about others, Jung wrote, wars, prejudice, and fanaticism, he believed, were not just political or social phenomena. They were psychological eruptions, the shadow of humanity spilling out when the inner balance was lost. But Jung did not speak of the shadow to condemn. He spoke of it to heal. He taught that by facing our darkness consciously, we reclaim the energy trapped within it. Anger, when acknowledged, can become strength. Fear, when understood, becomes wisdom. Even our mistakes, he said, are not to be erased, but integrated, for they are teachers in disguise. He saw this process as essential to what he called individuation, the journey toward becoming whole. The path was not about perfection, but about balance. To become yourself, you must embrace all that you are. Like in his writings and therapy, Jung encouraged his patients to confront their shadows through dreams, art, and reflection. He noticed how the repressed elements of the psyche often appeared in dreams as thieves, monsters, strangers, or wild animals. These were not enemies to be slain, but messengers to be understood. They carried the wisdom of what we had abandoned. Sometimes, the confrontation was painful. People wept when they realized how much of themselves they had disowned. Yet Jung saw this as a sacred moment, the beginning of true healing. One does not become whole by suppressing what is unwanted, he said softly, but by meeting it with love. He believed that morality, as society defines it, often splits the psyche in two. We are taught to chase only what is good, pure, acceptable, and in doing so, but from learning to hold it gently. The gold, he said, is in the dark. As he aged, Jung often reflected on how his own shadow shaped his life. His pride, his impatience, his need for solitude, all had caused pain at times. Yet he no longer saw these qualities as enemies. They were part of the same soul that sought truth, that loved deeply, that dreamed vividly. "I am not what happened to me," he once wrote. "I am what I choose to become." He came to see the shadow as not just darkness, but as potential, the unlived life. Within every suppressed emotion lies a spark of energy, waiting to be transformed. The artist's rage can become creation. The coward's fear can become humility. The sinner's guilt can awaken compassion. Jung believed that redemption begins not in heaven, but within the quiet what we refuse to face within ourselves, we will meet again and again in the world, through conflict, heartbreak, or loss, until we finally listen. To integrate the shadow is to make peace with reality. It is to look into the mirror and say, yes, this too is me. It is not a single act, but a lifelong practice, one that brings both humility and freedom. And so, Jung's message was clear and timeless. Do not fear your darkness. It is not your enemy. It is your doorway. Within the night of the soul lies the seed of dawn. Sometimes, in the evenings at his lakeside home, Jung would watch the fire burn low and whisper to himself the truth he had earned through years of struggle, that to become whole, one must befriend the very shadows that once terrified the heart. And as the night deepened, he saw that the darkness he once feared and emotions that feel older than time. Jung called this mysterious realm the collective unconscious, a hidden ocean beneath the surface of every mind, where the memories of humanity itself lie sleeping. It was not imagination that led him there, but observation. In his patient's dreams, he began to notice recurring patterns. Ancient gods, snakes coiled around trees, floods, towers, heroes, and mothers of light. These people had never studied mythology, yet their minds spoke in myth. Something deep within them was speaking an older language, one not taught by culture, but inherited by the soul. Jung realized that beneath our personal experiences lies a deeper layer of psyche, shared by all, a vast repository of symbols, instincts, and archetypes. He described it as the psychic DNA of humanity. The human race was whispering to itself, again and again, the same eternal stories of love, death, fear, and rebirth. He called these recurring patterns archetypes, universal blueprints that shape the way we perceive and behave. The mother, the hero, the trickster, the wise old man, the shadow, the child. They are not just characters of myth. They are reflections of our inner world. When we dream of being lost in a forest or climbing a mountain, when we face a dragon or meet a mysterious guide, these are not random images. They are the soul's language, echoing from the depths of the collective unconscious. To Jung, this discovery was both beautiful and haunting. It meant that the human mind was not isolated, not just a private self trapped in a body. We are all connected through the same invisible roots. The psyche, he said, is not of today. Its ancestry goes back many millions of years. Within this vision, humanity became something sacred, a single dream unfolding through countless eyes. The stories of ancient Egypt, of Greece, of India, of the indigenous peoples of the world, all were variations of the same inner drama. The hero's journey was not a myth about someone else. It was the map of our own becoming. The gods and monsters of old were not literal beings, but symbols of the energies that still live within us. Desire, fear, love, chaos, creation. Jung often said that the collective unconscious reveals itself most vividly in art, religion, and myth. A painting, a ritual, a legend. These are ways the unconscious speaks aloud. When an artist creates, they are not simply inventing. They are tuning into something older, something that has always existed. Inspiration, he believed, was not personal, but archetypal. It was the collective soul moving through an individual. Yet, Jung also to be touched by the collective unconscious is to stand before something vast and impersonal. Many who encounter it through dreams, visions, or deep spiritual experience can lose their footing. The ego, small and fragile, cannot always bear the weight of the archetypal world. That is why Jung insisted on balance. He taught that one must remain grounded, rooted in ordinary life, relationships, and work, even while exploring the infinite. No tree, he said, can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell. He saw this balance as the core of psychological growth. The collective unconscious is the soil from which the self emerges, the true center of being that transcends the ego. It is through dialogue with this deeper realm that a person becomes whole. The more we understand our dreams and symbols, the more we awaken to the story we are living unconsciously. For Jung, during his darkest nights, he had seen visions that felt older than himself. Gods with animal faces, ancient wars, cosmic floods. He was terrified at first, fearing madness. But then he realized he was not going insane. He was entering the same mythic field that poets and prophets had touched for centuries. He was walking the dream of humanity. He described it later as meeting the soul, and in those encounters, he began to see that the unconscious was not merely personal memory or fantasy, but a living intelligence, one that speaks in images, not words. It does not argue or explain, it shows. It weaves meaning through symbols that bypass logic and reach directly into the heart. Sometimes, when Jung spoke of these ideas, people found them too mystical, but he didn't mind. The reason modern man finds it so hard to believe in the unconscious, he said, is because he has lost his soul. He believed that to rediscover the collective unconscious was to rediscover what it means to be human, not as isolated minds, but as parts of a greater living story. In quiet moments, Jung would write that perhaps the collective unconscious is the true inheritance of humanity, a treasure chest of wisdom, pain, and beauty passed down through millennia. It holds the memory of our ancestors' struggles and triumphs. The primal rhythm of life itself. He would sometimes stand by the lake and watch the water shimmer under the moonlight, feeling the same awe that ancient people must have felt, that sense of belonging to something endless. Whatever has been created once, he wrote, still exists somewhere. To understand the collective unconscious is to realize that we are not alone, even in our solitude. Our dreams are not just our own. Our fears have been felt before. our hopes to find meaning in the mystery of being alive. And as he grew older, Jung began to feel that this hidden realm was not just psychological, but sacred. It was the bridge between the human and the divine, between memory and myth. Perhaps, he thought, the soul of humanity dreams through us, and that is why Jung's ideas still haunt us. Because when we listen deeply enough, we feel it too, the ancient whisper within our modern hearts. And so, as the candle flickered low, Jung's vision widened beyond one life, one mind, one age, until he saw that every soul was a mirror of the same timeless dream. Dreams, symbols, and the language of the soul. At night, when the world grows quiet and the mind drifts into its secret chambers, something ancient awakens within us. It speaks not in words, but in images. Strange, beautiful, it tells us what we truly feel, what we truly fear, and what we might yet become. To Jung, a dream was never random. It was a message, a living poem written by the psyche to itself. He would sit with his patients and ask them to describe their dreams in detail. Every color, every sound, every feeling. He listened as if decoding a sacred text. A snake could mean danger or rebirth. A falling bridge might speak of a life transition. A dark house could symbolize the unexplored corners of the self. Yet, he always cautioned, the dream is its own interpreter. No symbol has a fixed meaning. Its truth lies in the dreamer's relationship to it. He saw the dream as a balancing act of the psyche, a way for the unconscious to correct the distortions of the dreams, Jung said, restore what we have neglected. They guide us back toward wholeness. In his own life, Jung's dreams often came as teachers. During his long inner crisis, that period of visions and voices, he filled notebook after notebook with his dream images, painting and writing until his hands trembled. These became the foundation for his Red Book, the private record of his dialogue with the unconscious. There, he met figures that spoke in riddles and symbols. An old man with wings, a serpent coiled around a tree, a radiant woman who appeared in his dreams as both muse and mystery. They told him that his task was not to dominate the unconscious, but to listen to it with humility. He realized that the soul speaks symbolically because it must. The unconscious is vast, timeless, and beyond language. It cannot speak it opens to something that cannot be fully expressed, only felt, intuited, lived. The symbol, he wrote, is the best possible expression for something unknown. And so, the dream became a sacred meeting place, where the personal and the universal touched. Jung would tell his patients, do not dismiss your dreams as nonsense. They are the voice of your inner truth, clothed in mystery. Even the most unsettling dream, he said, carries a gift. The nightmare is not a punishment. To Jung, the dream world was not less real than waking life. It was another dimension of reality. The modern world, he lamented, had forgotten how to dream meaningfully. In our rush toward reason and technology, we had lost the inner dialogue that once guided ancient civilizations. Long ago, he said, people listened to their dreams as messages from the gods. They built temples around them, wrote oracles, created myths. We instead had silenced that inner voice, and in doing so, silenced the divine within. But Jung believed we could remember again. Through dream work, through journaling, through reflection and creative expression, we could restore that forgotten bridge between consciousness and soul. He often told his patients to write down their dreams each morning, to draw or paint what they saw, and to reflect on what emotions arose. It was not about solving the dream, but feeling it, living with it, allowing it like dawn spreading across a quiet lake. He saw dreams as the purest form of honesty, unfiltered, untouched by social masks or moral pretenses. The dream, he wrote, shows the inner truth and reality of the patient as it really is. To ignore it is to ignore oneself. And so, Jung treated every dream like a whisper from the depths, tender, precise, and deserving of reverence. As his theories deepened, Jung began to see how dreams connected to myth and symbol. The same archetypes he found in ancient stories appeared again and again in modern dreams. The hero, the guide, the mother, the serpent, the shadow, the unconscious, and in that rhythm, he heard something universal, the heartbeat of humanity. To dream was to participate in that living mystery, to touch the ancient pulse that connects us all. Sometimes, Jung would speak softly about his own dreams, of houses with endless rooms, of journeys through mountains and forests, of voices that spoke in symbols he did not fully understand. He said these dreams made him feel humble before the mystery of existence. Man, he wrote, cannot stand a meaningless life. Dreams, he believed, return meaning to us when the world feels hollow. They remind us that even in silence, life is still speaking. He often described the process of dream interpretation as walking through a forest at night. You may not see far ahead, but if you walk slowly, and so, Jung's message was simple, almost childlike. Remember your dreams. They are the bridge between who you are and who you could become. They are the mirror of your soul, the voice of the eternal within the temporary. When you dream, you are not alone. You are speaking with the same ancient intelligence that once whispered to prophets, poets, and wanderers under the stars. In this way, Jung taught that dreaming is not an escape from life, but a deeper form of living. The night does not hide the truth. It reveals it in another form, softer, subtler, more beautiful. And as Jung once wrote in his journal, watching the morning light return after a long night of dreams, the dream is the small hidden door to the deepest and most intimate sanctum of the soul. The hidden gendered energies that shape our feelings, thoughts, and relationships. The anima, the feminine presence in a man's psyche, and the animus, the masculine presence in a woman's, are not people, but forces, subtle, living, and profoundly transformative. He realized that these inner figures appear in dreams, visions, and imagination, often as guides or teachers. For men, the anima might emerge as a mysterious woman, beautiful, elusive, sometimes frightening, calling them to emotional depth and empathy. For women, the animus might appear as a wise or assertive man, urging courage, clarity, and integration of rational strength. These figures are not merely fantasies. They are the psyche's way of balancing itself, reminding us that wholeness requires embracing all aspects of our inner world. Jung noticed that failure to recognize these forces leads to conflict. A man who denies his anima might become rigid, harsh, or a woman who suppresses her animus may feel indecisive, disconnected, or powerless. When ignored, these energies are projected outward, shaping the people around us. The partner, friend, or colleague who frustrates us may be a mirror of the inner companion we refuse to acknowledge. By denying these inner presences, we live in shadows, forever searching outside ourselves for what we already possess within. He often spoke of this recognition as a delicate, lifelong dance, a conversation rather than a conquest. Meeting the anima or animus requires humility and courage. It asks us to observe without judgment, to listen without fear, to integrate without force. It is a journey into the subtler, hidden currents of our personality, where we confront both beauty and danger, tenderness and shadow. In Jung's own life, sometimes she appeared as a guide, sometimes as a seductress, and sometimes as a stern teacher. Through these encounters, Jung learned patience, compassion, and the importance of dialogue between conscious mind and unconscious soul. He realized that the anima does not control the man. She enriches him, deepens him, and completes him, but only if he is willing to meet her. Similarly, he observed the animus in women he treated. It appeared as a voice of reason, courage, or strength, often conflicting with societal expectations or the woman's own self-image. Integration of the animus required listening to this. The journey toward wholeness is incomplete without engaging these energies. Their presence illuminates the ways we resist love, intimacy, creativity, and authentic expression. Through them, we discover not just the hidden aspects of our psyche, but the doorway to emotional and spiritual maturity. Jung also understood that these figures are archetypal. They carry the collective wisdom of generations. The feminine and masculine within us are not simply personal, but echo the eternal dance of humanity. Every myth, every legend, every sacred story, from Aphrodite to Krishna, reflects these inner dynamics, but balance. The conscious acceptance of our hidden other. The sacred dialogue between what we are and what we have yet to become. Through this inner union, the human soul learns to harmonize its opposites, light with shadow, reason with intuition. Individuation becoming whole. Every journey has its destination, yet Jung believed that the truest journey is not toward a place, but toward oneself. He called this process individuation, the slow, patient unfolding of the soul into wholeness. It is a lifelong endeavor, a weaving together of light and shadow, conscious and unconscious, masculine and feminine, thought and feeling. To be individuated is to be fully oneself, neither fractured by denial nor lost in imitation of others. Jung saw that most people live in halves, parts of their potential left unexplored, hidden or ignored. The shadow remains unrecognized, the anima or animus unintegrated, the archetypes unheeded. Life moves forward, yet there is an ache, a sense of incompleteness that whispers constantly beneath the surface. We must look into our darkest corners, face the impulses we would rather deny, and listen to the inner voices we have silenced. Dreams, symbols, and myths become guides along the way, revealing truths that the rational mind cannot grasp. Each insight, each acceptance is a step toward unity, a thread sewn into the tapestry of the self. Jung often described individuation as a spiral rather than a line, a process of returning, again and again, to the same themes until understanding deepens. One confronts the shadow, revisits dreams, dialogues with the anima or animus, and reflects on the archetypal patterns that arise in life. Each encounter is a mirror, showing not only what is hidden, but what is possible. The journey is deeply personal, yet it resonates with a universal rhythm, the same rhythm that has guided humans through myth, ritual, and story since the beginning of time. In his own life, his dialogue with archetypes all were steps in becoming whole. He did not emerge as a perfected man, but as one deeply aware of his inner complexity. He accepted that contradictions coexist within him, that light and dark are inseparable, and that the self is not a static goal, but a living, evolving presence. Individuation also carries a relational dimension. Jung noted that as we integrate our inner world, our connections with others shift. Relationships become mirrors rather than chains. We cease to project our disowned parts onto others, and instead see them as reflections of our shared humanity. Love, creativity, and empathy deepen. The process of becoming whole is not solitary. It radiates outward, touching the lives around us. He emphasized that the journey is often painful. Growth demands honesty, humility, and persistence. Yet within this struggle lies the possibility of transformation. The chaos of the unconscious, once feared, becomes a source of wisdom and vitality. The storm is not to be avoided, but to be navigated with awareness and courage. Jung likened individuation to alchemy, the transformation of base matter into gold. The raw experiences of life, our fears, shadows, and failures, are the lead we must refine. Symbols, dreams, and archetypes are the alchemical tools, guiding us through the processes of dissolution and recombination until the soul reaches a state of inner coherence. It is a sacred work, requiring patience, attentiveness, and deep respect for the unknown within. He also recognized that individuation is never complete. Life continuously presents new challenges, new shadows. Each stage of life brings fresh opportunities to integrate what has been overlooked, to encounter the eternal truths that reside within the psyche, and to move ever closer to wholeness. In the quiet moments by the lake, Jung often reflected on this path. He understood that individuation is not a solitary conquest, but a gentle, intimate conversation with the soul. It is the courage to meet oneself fully, to embrace all that we are, and to honor the deeper rhythms of life. Each step toward wholeness carries a sense of sacredness, a quiet recognition that life itself is both guide and teacher. And as the night deepened, Jung felt the subtle pulse of transformation, a gentle, enduring light that flows quietly beneath the surface of all being, waiting revolutions, technological leaps, and the quiet unraveling of human connection. His work haunts us, not because it is outdated, but because it touches something eternal, the hidden, often neglected world within ourselves. His legacy is alive in the symbols that recur in dreams, in the stories that resonate, and in the questions we ask when we feel unsettled, incomplete, or searching. Jung's ideas endure because they speak to a truth most of us sense but rarely name, that beneath the surface of our ordinary lives lies a vast inner universe. The shadow, the anima and animus, the archetypes, the collective unconscious. These are not academic abstractions. They are living currents that flow quietly through every thought, every emotion, every impulse. To deny them is to live, chart the neurons, and catalog behavior. Yet, these efforts only touch the surface. The true mysteries, dreams, symbols, intuition, the longing for wholeness, remain beyond pure reason. Jung showed that psychology must embrace both science and soul, intellect and intuition, observation and imagination. His work also endures because it is deeply personal and profoundly humane. He invites us to see ourselves without judgment, to meet our inner contradictions with curiosity, and to approach life as a sacred dialogue between consciousness and unconsciousness. The psyche, he taught, is not a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be explored. And in this exploration, the anima and animus stir in the complexities of our relationships. Archetypes rise in the patterns of our stories, myths, and media, reminding us that the past and present, the individual and collective, are intertwined. To encounter Jung's vision is to encounter oneself, fully, deeply, and sometimes uncomfortably. Yet within this haunting is hope. Jung's insights do not condemn, they guide. They illuminate a path toward wholeness, urging us to integrate our contradictions. Jung's ideas have seeped into the collective consciousness, shaping the ways we understand ourselves and the stories we tell. They haunt us because they are alive, persistent, and impossible to fully contain. Just as the unconscious is, he also challenges us to face our inner darkness, to acknowledge the shadow within society, and to engage in the lifelong work of individuation. His words echo quietly in the mind. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. To live fully is to journey inward, to meet the self in its wholeness, and to navigate the eternal dialogue between the conscious and the unconscious. Jung's enduring legacy is intimate, subtle, and profoundly human. It is the feeling that life is more than appearances. His ideas haunt because they awaken us, not disturb us. They remind us that the greatest mysteries are not in the stars or in distant lands, but in the quiet, hidden landscape of our own souls. And so, as the night deepened and the world slept, Jung's vision lingers in our hearts, a gentle, persistent echo. It whispers to those who dare to listen. Explore your dreams, meet your shadows, honor your symbols, and step into the vast, uncharted world within. His ideas haunt us because they are alive, timeless, and essential. The soft, enduring light of a mind that dared to dream of the depths of the human soul. And as the night deepened, his journey became ours, a quiet invitation to listen, reflect, and awaken to the eternal dialogue that flows within us all.